discussing Chiara Marletto on the Sean Carroll podcast. Chiara Marletto has been a recurring theme in this podcast series because of her book, The Science of Can and Can't, because of her work with David Deutsch, because of her work about counterfactuals, and she tries to understand the world from a different perspective. She tries to understand physics from a different perspective. I want to discuss some of the learnings I got from the podcast, some of the inspiration, some of the ideas that come from her work and from her collaboration with David Deutsch. This is not In Wrong podcast. It's October 5th, 2021. This is the second episode today. We are up for the year 9%, and the market's up 15.5%. We're underperforming by 6.5%. So Chiara Marletto on the Sean Carroll podcast talks about her book, talks about her work. I have spoken about this before, so let me just briefly recap what she stands for from a scientific perspective, and then what the insights are that we at Orange Capital Partners can take from this. And I think this is very important because David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity is part of our principle stack. We have a principle stack because there is no theory of how to generate wealth. And as Chiara Marletto actually says in the podcast, if you don't have a theory, if you don't have a model that is deterministically telling you how things will evolve, you have to rely on principles. And principles, the purpose of principles is they allow you to develop laws later on that you might be finding useful in terms of achieving your goals. So in the words of science, it means that principles are a tool for solving problems. And since you don't really know what kind of problems you'll be solving in the future, since you don't even know what kind of questions you'll be asking in the future based on the problems that you're going to solve in the future, I think it's very it's useful to have principles. Principles should be able to transcend that, and that's exactly how we feel at Orange Capital Partners. Since we don't know exactly what kind of problems we'll be solving in a year or 2 or 5, we don't know exactly how we're going to be positioned as a fund with our portfolio companies within the context of the macro environment. We rely on principles. We have a principle stack based on 4 books, 0 to 1, the innovation stack, The Beginning of Infinity, and The Innovator's Dilemma. I'm not going to mention much more about this now. There's many episodes, particularly some of the early ones where we talk about this. Now let's get back to Chiara Marletto. So I think the main concept that Marletto is questioning and trying to find solutions for is the following problem. Traditional physics starts with an initial set of conditions and then dynamic laws that explain how the initial set of conditions can be transformed. This is in general how we still perform physics. So we have an initial set of conditions and then dynamic laws, and we see where that takes us. What Chiara Marletto is proposing is the concept of counterfactuals. In principle, what that means is that you have still a possibility of a transformation of an initial set of conditions. However, you're looking at counterfactuals and not just at a deterministic set of transformations. So there are different ways that this could go. And therefore, you cannot predict today, or you don't have a theory of how you're going to deal with certain transformations in the future, because you don't know how the counterfactuals will play out. So therefore, you want to try to build a theory, you want to try to develop a theory which incorporates those counterfactuals. And this is the way I understand that the work that Chiara Marletto and David Deutsch are trying to find solutions for. How can we have a theory that takes into account the counterfactuals and therefore implicitly, innately, already deals with certain potential new problems that we don't even know about today? And instead of having those paradigm shifts and all that stuff that we have today, so we have, Newton, and then all of a sudden we come up with Einstein, and then general relativity, and then we have quantum physics, and then we have problems that we don't know how to solve because our initial set of transformations or the laws of physics that we know that help us understand how initial set of conditions are transformed, they don't really help us understand the reality the way we see it today. And we see it today differently than before because we solved certain problems, we created knowledge. So maybe we can have a theory that takes account of those counterfactuals and therefore is more comprehensive. And by having that kind of theory, we could potentially also find much better solutions and even ask much more interesting questions and so on and so forth. This is, in a nutshell, the way I see this is the way I see this particular situation with Chiara Marletto. And there's a lot of talk about physics, of course, in the Sean Carroll podcast, and that's very interesting, but the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So I want to now get to Orange Capital Partners and why we're so interested in David Deutsch and Chiara Marletto. Because we believe that there's a couple of things that we can take from their work and really directly apply to the wealth creation process. And one of them is the concept of counterfactuals. The concept of counterfactuals actually shows in the principle of the innovation stack. What is an innovation stack? It is the building out of a company that is built on a set of problems that get solved, and then you create new problems, you solve those problems, and you continue doing that, and you build a company that is not time reversible. This is really important because you've built that innovation stack. You have built something that is very unique, and it's unique in a way that competitors can't compete, but it's also unique in a way that the actual let's say what you've got, let's say Tesla is an innovation stack, and Tesla as an innovation stack is not reversible. So if you go back, if you go back 20 years when Tesla was started, there was a certain process which was driven by counterfactuals. In other words, Tesla was building an innovation stack where at any point where that innovation stack was evolving, there was a certain problem that got solved. And if you go forward now from 2002 or whenever Musk founded the company till today, you can't reverse that. It's not deterministically reversible. So Tesla is like let's say definitely, well, now I'm really on thin ice. I don't want to talk about second law of thermodynamics, but I just want to say it's not reversible. And I think innovation stack companies in general are not reversible. So it goes one way, you can't just reverse it back the other way. Because all the initial steps that got you from the beginning to today have been driven by the concept of counterfactuals and or in more plain English, by the solutions to problems, and those problems begetted new problems, and those were all counterfactuals that got instantiated into products and services, and therefore you cannot go back. And I would say that companies where you can actually, there are companies that are reversible. Let's say JP Morgan is a reversible bank company, because it's pretty much, the counterfactuals are, most companies actually try to get rid of the counterfactuals. They try to have predictability and certainty. They argue by analogy, which is another word to say you don't take into account counterfactuals. They try to take in uncertainty out of the equation, which is another way to say you take out the possibility of counterfactuals. So I would say most human beings, most companies, everybody out there is trying to not deal with counterfactuals. Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, talks about the uniqueness of a startup, the uniqueness of a founder, the personality of a founder, and a lot of these things. And I think it could be summarized also in typical Peter Thiel type founder is somebody who embraces counterfactuals, and a non-typical, so a person that is trying to, with all means, avoid counterfactuals is, I would say, what Peter Thiel would call a conventional person. This to us is the most interesting insight from this conversation. This is pretty important because it helps us understand why we are invested in the types of companies we're invested in. It helps us understand also, of course, what we're trying not to do, which is certainly not invest in companies that are reversible. So if I see a company where I can say, well, it's going to go forward the same way, and I could just reverse it backward, there has been no build out of an innovation stack whatsoever, then that is not a good example, and I think, excuse me, that's not a good investment. If you look at the, let's say, traditional car companies, they are trying by all means to still circumvent reversibility. They try to do what they've been doing in the past and keep doing the same thing, etc., instead of trying to do something that is irreversible, trying to embrace counterfactuals, trying to do something new, trying to do something unique, to use more plain English. So this, I think, is the most interesting insight from the Chiara Marletto conversation. Again, it is the emphasis on counterfactuals. Counterfactuals is another word of to explain what it means to deal with in build out of an innovation stack. The innovation stack is just a sort of business-like way to talk about counterfactuals. Counterfactuals and innovation stacks happen not just in business, they happen in science. This is the Popperian view of science. And they happen in pretty much anything else that nature throws at us. And I would argue it's the only way that nature can evolve and keep itself interesting versus getting to some sort of status quo or death or whatever you want to call it, where actually the counterfactuals get avoided. Death is one way to avoid counterfactuals because you don't have the opportunity to go either left or right or whatever once you're dead. And David Deutsch, I think, in one of his TED Talks talks about this, that one way to, one word for a situation where you don't solve problems anymore is death. So I think that is what I wanted to say about this particular conversation. This episode might be a little bit over the top for some people. Maybe the insight for other people is not that great. People have seen, heard us talk about this before. For people who are familiar with Chiara Marletto and David Deutsch, it might sound a bit, well, yeah, I mean, we know that, but I think the bridge that we're trying to build here between David Deutsch and the process of wealth creation, it is a worthwhile bridge to take because it's the same bridge that Popper is taking between philosophy and science, and the key insight is that there's whatever science is from a Popperian point of view, that's also what business is. Business is nothing but build out of an innovation stack, to use Jim McKelvey's words, or Popper would say business is nothing but a set of conjectures to solve certain problems and then create new problems and solve those problems. This is what business is, this is what science is. This is also, I think, as the same way, also if you want to apply to the political realm, business is, politics in the Popperian view is the process of replacing bad leaders with better leaders, bad ideas with better ideas, and do that without coercion and do that without violence. And this is exactly how we see business in a free market economy. What we call a free market economy is basically when businesses replace other businesses with better ideas, better products, better services, better solutions to better problems. And that happens through the build out of an innovation stack. And the only way you can do that is actually through the concept of computation, which is the exploration of counterfactuals. Thank you.